This video was made possible by sponsors like you. Thank you for supporting us on Patreon. When we think Disney, we think musical numbers, princess wanting more, toyetic sidekicks made for merchandising, that's the most important part, and of course the villain. Hi, I'm Nero, and welcome to Toongrin. Today, I want to talk about Disney villains. For many storytellers will say, the villain is the hero of the other side. But when it comes to Disney, the villains are usually just colorful, fun obstacles with about as much depth as a puddle, though there are some exceptions. Now, I've walked this earth for 30 plus years, and I have viewed Disney junk from its most popular to its most obscure to its downright disowned. Now, before we get started, the rules of this list are simple. 1. They must be from a Disney animated film. 2. This list is of my personal thoughts. If you don't agree with my choices, then you're welcome to comment below. And if you're gonna be a butt-nose about it, you're welcome to shut up. Now then, let's turn up the juice and see what shakes loose. This is the top 10 best Disney villains. Tamatoa from Moana, a kaiju-sized coconut crab that talks with the vocal mannerisms of David Bowie. Honestly, this character should be easily forgotten. Tamatoa really isn't all that impactful in the story of Moana. In fact, he's basically a side character. He's not even really a major player in the film. Sure, he has Maui's hook, but you could have easily written the hook being somewhere else. At most, Tamatoa is just a mild obstacle to overcome. That being said, he is arguably a breakout character that a majority of audiences remember, and that's in no small part to his voice performer, Jermaine Clement, who captures a suave and yet creepy personality. Now, of course, Tamatoa has all the iconic trademarks of a Disney villain. He's greedy, charismatic, of course, and being a villain, he does get a song, which is the best song in the movie. Second best song in the movie. After all, there is Maui's. Speaking of the shapeshifter, demigod of the wind and sea, and hero of men and women, Maui and Tamatoa actually do work pretty great as opposites to one another in terms of thematics. Both Maui and Tamatoa have personal self-doubt that revolve around them finding value on the outside to reflect their greatness. Basically, they're both braggarts that want to show off just how great they are. In the case of Maui, he has his tattoos that chronicle his accomplishments, and in the case of Tamatoa, he has a massive treasure hoard adorning his shell. However, Tamatoa also works as a parallel for Moana herself, as she is on a quest of self-discovery and identity. Moana discovers who she is by experience, life, personal growth, you know, the stuff that we all go through. While Tamatoa has his value being that he owns stuff. Basically, Tamatoa is that kid in school who's like, I got a Charizard, first edition, holofoil, that means I'm the best. Anyway, at the end of their adventure, the heroes are left in peace and prosperity, and little Tamatoa is left in a cave all alone and stuck in place. A fitting metaphor to show that when you have such a shallow worldview, you will always be trapped in a part of your own world.
Shiny. I'm so shiny. Didn't help me though, did it?
Yzma from The Emperor's New Groove. And to a lesser extent Kronk, because they're sort of a package deal. It's kind of how the comedy works. Talk about a character saved by revisions. Originally, the idea of Yzma was nothing short of dumb. Originally, Yzma was going to be a sorceress, once famed for her beauty, and then she got, you know. And she blamed her hideous appearance on the sun, so she planned to let out a demon to plunge the kingdom into eternal darkness in exchange for eternal youth. You know, that old chestnut. I mean, the idea has some merit to it. It could be actually very funny. Though honestly, making Yzma a jaded worker somehow makes her more relatable. Every single one of us has worked, and we've had that one boss who's just a buffoon that it's any kind of sheer alignment of the stars that they even have the job they have. Now, like many Disney villains before her, Yzma is malicious and power-hungry, and she does work as a parallel to Kuzco, given that they are both egocentric, self-serving jerkwads. Only difference is Kuzco goes through an arc, and Yzma stays perfectly the same. Above all else, Yzma is arguably one of the most hilarious Disney villains to ever exist. and that is in no small part thanks to her voice performer, the late great Eartha Kitt, who delights in playing up the diva aspect. Another factor that honestly seems like it doesn't happen as much in these movies is that we don't get a lot of henchman-boss relationships that are quirky as Yzma with her beefcake brute Kronk.
Don't you see? It's perfect. With him out of the way and no heir to the throne, I'll take over and rule the Empire. Brilliant.
So, how does that work with you being fired and all?
Of course, with Patrick Warburton at the wheel, it's no wonder the performance is amazing. And him being a big, lovable oaf is far better than being a magical talking amulet. Again, man, saved in rewrites. In my opinion, these two really should be looked at as a pinnacle for antagonistic comedic interaction. You got a bumbling brute with a knack for the grill, and a woman that can best be described as... what is it?
Hey, scary beyond all reason.
Yeah, that's it. Dr. Facilier from The Princess and the Frog. A manipulative, smooth-talking boker with the sultry voice of Keith David, who plots to rule New Orleans because he's in debt to a bunch of voodoo loa. You gotta love this level of madness. He's basically a henchman for, like, angry voodoo gods. And, incidentally, he's in debt to a bunch of aroused voodoo gods. And don't tell me that ain't the case. You look at that scene, look at that animation. That's some kind of arousal. That's something. A big criticism I have for Facilier as a character is that he only interacts with the film's lead, Tiana, only in the third act as things are wrapping up. That does annoy me because it makes him little more than just a MacGuffin, a plot instigator, rather than a driving force of villainy in the lives of our heroes. Despite the lack of interaction, Facilier does have an engaging personality that is simply delightful and remarkably relatable. Coming from a poor background, and not to mention the mild touch of racial commentary that the movie doesn't really like to talk about, being that it is the 1910s.
You tired of living on the margins, while all those fat cats in their fancy cars don't give you so much as a sideways glance?
Facilier does grow up resenting the rich, and works with the idea that real power doesn't come from magic, it comes from money. Which, given our society's weak-willed nature to kowtow to the likes of celebrities and politicians getting away with virtually anything due to their financial standings in the real world, I mean, it's just too real. Dr. Facilier also works well as a parallel to Tiana and Prince Naveen. Tiana is a hard worker, and Naveen is a well-intentioned slacker. See, Facilier is all about them shortcuts with his voodoo, and yet despite the powerful dark magic he wields, his voodoo isn't limitless, and his shortcuts can't give him what he wants. And much like Tiana and Prince Naveen, they too got their strength from friends. And so does Dr. Facilier. The moral here is choose your friends wisely, especially if they are friends from the other side. Hades from Hercules. If Robin Williams elevated Genie from a typical toyetic sidekick role, then James Woods did the same, elevating Hades from a typical doom and gloom antagonist to a Disney villain icon. Originally, the idea was that Hades was going to be played more straight-laced like Jafar from Aladdin. The idea being a darker, more brooding villain. The studio even went through a series of performers to capture that malevolent aspect. And fortunately, they snagged James Woods, and the rest was history.
Mr. High and Mighty, Mr. Hey You, get off of my cloud. Now he has a bouncing
Mighty Brett. We know!
I know. I got it. The concept.
It's funny, James believed that he wasn't right for the role, that he couldn't play up a brooding kind of character. So he approached Hades very casually, with mannerisms to that of a fast-talking, sleazy car salesman. Which you think would make Hades a typical devil character, very stereotypical, he makes a deal with you and then he somehow stiffs you in the end? But no, seriously, go back and rewatch the movie again. Hades is remarkably honest and always keeps his word throughout the course of the film. Every deal brokered, be it the one with Meg, the one with Herc, he never tries to weasel out of paying his debt. Dr. Facilier would use wordplay to manipulate his deals, but Hades actually stays on the straight and narrow, which is funny, given it plays against the whole fast-talking Carnarder's personality he has. Now, of course, Hades isn't without fault. He does break one of my personal rules, and that's the antagonist really should interact more with the protagonist. and much like Dr. Facilier, he doesn't directly interact with Herc all that much throughout the course of the film. In terms of direct involvement, Hades surprisingly has only 4 minutes of interaction with Hercules, and a few of that was when Herc's a baby, and therefore really, that's kind of a one-sided conversation, isn't it? Yet despite their indirect involvement as hero and villain, the role of Hades is captivating, and he is actually one of the most delightfully devilish Disney villains to ever grace the silver screen. Also, while we're being honest here, he's more memorable than Herc, or anything else in this movie.
Boom, bada, boom, boom, boom. Ah.
Forte from Beauty and the Beast: The Enchanted Christmas. I know, right? This fart of a movie actually does have one saving grace, and that is Forte, who hits a lot of good notes for me. Plus, he does fall into my rules I said at the start of the video. Star simple. 1. They must be from a Disney animated film. See? I did say that, so eat it. I didn't break my rules. On with the show. First off, it's Tim Curry, who much like bacon improves everything. Second, I believe we need to talk a little bit about the animation. Now this is during the early age of CGI being implemented, but you know what? The uncanny valley look to Forte with the hollowed out eyes actually does work to its favor because something about it is very unearthly. It captures the facial features of Tim Curry, but it's still just this thing that it's its own entity, and I think that off-putting look is actually beneficial in this regard as opposed to being a detriment as it would be in any other kind of film. Forte also works as a dark reflection of Beast, and for a few reasons. For one, Forte and Beast have a solid portrayal of an abusive relationship. Forte is an advisor, a confidant, a friend to Beast, someone that Beast should be able to trust, and yet Forte manipulates Beast.
Don't worry, old friend. I'm here for you, just as I have been, just as I always will be.
Both are cursed, but where Beast is in anguish and alone with his cursed form, Forte seems to thrive in his cursed form. Through sheer willpower, Forte manifests his music to affect the world around him. Forte is a composer who desires adulation, he desires to be praised, whereas Beast desires genuine love. Forte is isolated in a section-off portion of the castle that Beast frequents alone, a fitting metaphor for how an abuser will keep a vulnerable person under their influence by isolating them from others. Both are very lonely characters who have become dependent on interacting with each other, often talking and spending time developing a toxic relationship. Then when Belle arrives, she shatters Forte's world because Beast has found somebody else to interact with, somebody to bring him hope, and Forte was smothering that. Really, Forte should have been a mainstream Disney villain in one of their theatrical films. He's a show stealer, he's funny, cruel, conniving, a prime example of a villain being more memorable than everything else in the film. From his social interactions, and of course, a villain song, Forte has one of the best villain songs in Disney's history, with lyrics that are surprisingly deep about the vile nature of toxic love. Forte is, as Bob Ross would put it, a happy accident.
Don't you see, Fife? They can't fall in love if they're dead.
King Candy from Wreck-It Ralph. When it comes to King Candy, there are various reasons why this character just works for me. One thing you have is the Ed Wynn mannerisms played by Alan Tudyk, and they are phenomenally identical to that of the Mad Hatter. And the Mad Hatter is one of my favorite Disney characters, so getting a villain version of that personality is just delightful. I believe it's also around this point when I started to notice that Disney aimed away from making their villains recognizably evil in terms of character design, and shifted to design them to appear soft, to set up for the idea of a twist villain, which they've become obsessed with over their last few films. King Candy works because while he might start off with that design aesthetic, his visuals do start to change that really do reflect his personality and mental state across the film. Given that this was the first outing they started to really push the whole twist villain angle into their films, I feel like King Candy is arguably the best version of the trope they've done, Like, if you look at his design, it's all about being sugar-coated and kind of like delightful and quirky, which is a fitting metaphor for the fact that he sugarcoats everything because he's a chronic liar who is just trying to control everything. That's just clever creativity to me. I really enjoyed that for a good portion of the film. I'd argue in a way that King Candy is a bit like the Disney Joker. He starts off very funny, and that's what you like about him, but then as you dive deeper down that rabbit hole, you just discover that he's a complete psychopath. Candy also works great as a dark reflection for Ralph, because with Ralph, the idea is appreciation. That's the thematic, just wanting to be appreciated. And for Ralph, it makes sense. He was an individual who grew up having to deal with prejudice his whole life for being a villain in a video game, even though he's a nice guy. And he just wanted to be appreciated. He wanted recognition. King Candy, on the other hand, wants recognition, but he was the mascot of his own game. He was getting recognition. But the moment that somebody else got just a teeny tiny bit of that limelight away from him, he started to unravel like a cheap dollar store sweater. His madness consumes him so much that the guy was willing to kill universes. Most Disney villains maybe want to kill a few people at best, or maybe some dinky kid. This guy was going to infect worlds. King Candy has a great negative character arc, which is a character arc that isn't really looked at too much in storytelling for some reason, or at least not in Disney films as far as I've noticed, where he could start off fun and lovable, approachable, and then that slowly crumbles away along with his psyche until all that's left is a delightfully deranged monster.
I can take over any game I want. I should thank you, but it'd be more fun to kill you.
Captain Pete from Mickey, Donald, Goofy, the Three Musketeers. A terribly long title, but that's as far as the terrible goes. You see, back in 2004, when Disney still had a minute bit of dignity, mind you though, not too much dignity, it was 2004, that's when they squeezed this turd out. And yet, despite this mound of manure, Disney did manage to squeeze out a few remarkably good films on the direct-to-video market. This amount of good allowed us a delightful and often overlooked well-animated film titled Mickey, Donald, Goofy, The Three Musketeers. The film is what I can only assume to be a very loose adaptation of Alexandre Dumas' novel, The Three Musketeers, and a remake of Disney's 1993 film, The Three Musketeers. Look at that! They were rehashing their old catalog as far back as 2004. Now for the younglings out there, a long time ago in a studio far, far away, they used to love the original creations of their emperor Walt Disney. They had iconic villains, and the most prolific of them all was Peg Leg Pete, played for the longest time now by Jim Cummings, all the way back since 1992, and is unanimous with the role, still playing him today.
I was born to cheat and lie. I'm a mean, rotten guy. When you ask me why I'm nasty, here's my reason why.
Based on the facts of life that cats and mice are natural enemies, Pete was conceived to be the arch nemesis of Mickey Mouse. And to a lesser extent, Goofy, because they were next door neighbors in Goof Troop, and Goofy's a dog and Pete's a cat, although I'm not sure what kind of dog, but the point is, in the flick itself, Captain Pete, captain of the Musketeers, is a villain that secretly plots to kidnap Princess Minnie and take over France and become the king. Pete embodies a lost art of the cartoonish villain, that is the balance of a threat to the hero while still being remarkably funny.
Captain Pete!
I'm in such a good mood.
There, you see, a villain who loves his job, which is to be a cantankerous, cartoonish oaf who thrives to get what they want. It's like Disney has forgotten these kinds of personalities in favor of the great twist ploy that they keep implementing in recent movies. While it would be nice to see more films based on the likes of Mickey, Donald, and Goofy, and if we're all being honest, any of Walt's creations instead of creating a new IP every frickin' year, Pete may often be overlooked, but he'll never be forgotten.
I did it, Mommy! I'm king of all France! I feel like eating a snail.
Chernabog from Fantasia's Night on Bald Mountain. To me, the recipe for an iconic Disney villain is one half characterization via brilliant voice performance, with another half being beautiful animation. Characters like Yzma, Hades, King Candy wouldn't be where they are today if it weren't for their voice performers and the animation that accompanies them. Chernabog, however, forgoes the vocal performance and is sold entirely on animation and musical accompaniment. Chernabog embodies the idea of perfect villainy solely through character design and body language. Based on a Slavic deity said to embody famine, illness, and poverty, Chernabog is the embodiment of pure, unrelenting evil. Even his name, Chernabog, means black god, signifying for many ancient worlds to be unanimous with death. A being of pure dark mass that greets you with nothing but a cruel glare and a vile smile. Unlike other Disney villains who are motivated, often usually by greed, Chernabog wants really for nothing. He merely exists akin to a force of nature, a plague that violently culls the land of life. Some could argue that Chernabog's motivation is the act of corruption itself. That's very possible, as the viewers were not given into Chernabog's machinations. All we can really infer without any doubt is that Chernabog has nothing but disdain for life's mere existence, and he delights in nothing more than snuffing it out. Chernabog is malevolent, raw, primal, enjoying the screams of the soul as though he were attending a symphony. Anguish, misery, sorrow, these are his delights. And with his arrival, Chernabog has such sights to show us. Plus the dude is just hilarious on House of Mouse.
I'm afraid of the dark. There, I said it.
That's part of my headcanon now. Every time I watch Fantasia, that's gonna be in there. Michael Goob Yagoobian, aka the bowler hat guy from Meet the Robinsons. While no one really talks about Meet the Robinsons, its villain, Bowler Hat Guy, or Goob, works as a brilliant parallel to the film's themes of never giving up, that mistakes are made and we must thrive to push forward and not let our past define us. Goob serves well as a perfect opposite to the film's protagonist Lewis, who learns to walk forward towards the future, while Goob meanders in the past, both literally and figuratively. As far as Disney villains go, Goob does a good job of walking the line of a goofy henchman. Think the lines of like Kronk, albeit arguably a bit dimmer, but also serves as a good primary villain, working with the themes, until the third act comes along, but that's for another video. This character is wonderful in terms of capturing both a degree of depth and a degree of comedy. And to thank for that performance, we got Stephen J. Anderson, the film's director, who took the role after Jim Carrey turned it down to be in the film 23. And frankly, we all dodged that ball. Knowing Carrey's career, he would have been, you know...
Are you in charge here?
Yes, I am.
Nope!
I'm
wrong. I'm in charge.
But instead, Stephen captures great comedy with the character and great tragedy. The interaction between past and future Goob in particular comes off to me as beautifully tragic. On first viewing, you think the tears Goob sheds are simply because he's established as an overly emotional goofball. But on repeat viewings, I thought that it could be that Goob is looking back on a life wasted, remembering how horrible his life became at this point. I've had those moments, and I think a lot of us have. Thinking about key points in our past and wondering if we did something different, how we would at least try to fix our lives rather than the path we ended up going down. Goob's lack of self-esteem is also pretty unique for a Disney villain. Rarely do Disney villains lack confidence. In the case of most Disney villains, especially the ones on this list, that self-confidence gives life to their charisma, and that's a huge factor for who they are, and is used to great effect for making up for a shallow degree of character depth. So when it comes to Goob, there's something beautifully tragic, especially in the ending. Instead of confronting what had happened and moving on, he runs away. And think, he could time travel. He could have gone back in time and like fixed his life. But his view was so narrow-minded. He became obsessed with just ruining Lewis's life. And when you think about it, he really does work as a reflection of holding one's grudges, not just on other people, but on a grudge on yourself as a person. And by doing that, you destroy yourself, eventually showing that you're unable to keep moving forward.
Heed my words, Goob. Don't let it go.
What?
Long John Silver from Treasure Planet. Here's not only an underrated movie, but honestly an underrated villain. Played by the late Brian Murray, John Silver is a lot of typical Disney villain tropes. Charismatic, greedy, cunning. But unlike many Disney villains, it's very rare for Disney villains to gain depth, let alone go through a redemption arc. Oftentimes, Disney villains are flat in terms of character depth, which is alright because they make up for it in terms of entertainment. I mean, even the most flat Disney villains can be vaguely entertaining. John Silver, however, did both, and he did both extremely well. Yes, John is a pirate, and yes, John did questionable things, but he was a man of conviction, and unlike past Disney villains, who frankly don't look like they've suffered to get where they are in life, and yet still complain about where they are in life. I mean, look at Jafar. Dude basically already controlled Agrabah. If he didn't take Aladdin to the lamp, he'd still be thriving by manipulating the seat of the kingdom with hypnosis. Jafar's an idiot. Silver, however, has conviction to find this treasure. He gave up so much chasing a dream, and in the end, he found a great treasure in Jim Hawkins. And some of you might be giggling that that's schmaltzy. Shut up! That's good character stuff right there, man. Disney villains don't tend to have character arcs. They don't tend to grow as people. Disney villains are created for the sole purpose of being an obstacle for the protagonist, have vague theatric ties on occasion, if any, as even that's the case, and at minimum, to be entertainment for the audience. Silver, however, broke that tradition and showed us that a Disney villain can be more than the sum of their parts. This pirate captain seems to be underrated by most in the animation community, but one thing I could say for sure is that I'll always treasure this villain turned hero in my heart, and he is my top best Disney villain.
You're going to rattle the stars, you are.
Thanks for watching my top 10 best Disney villains, and feel free to comment below so we can discuss what you think. Who are your favorite Disney villains? The classics, or do you have some underrated ones like I do? Leave your thoughts and comments below. Please subscribe and hit the notification bell, follow me on social, and if you like, you can support me by Patreon or Twitter. Links are in the description below, and as always, be sure to tune in to Toon Grin.